Welcome to this short video about organizing your argument, brought to you from the Writing Center. You've come up with a draft thesis statement or research question, you've written your first draft, and now you want to check the flow and structure of your argument. Let's start by clearing away some myths and misconceptions. The first one is that your introduction can be only one paragraph long. That's not true. It may work for a very short paper, say one that is under 10 pages long, but for longer papers, if you're writing a 15-page paper, one paragraph may not be enough. Look to the expectations for your assignment and what your professor has instructed you to do. You also need to look at the genre and field you're working in to look for the expectations. The second misconception is that your thesis statement or research question must be the last paragraph of the introduction. That's not true either. In most cases, the thesis statement or research question should come towards the end of your beginning, but it doesn't have to be the very last sentence. You may, for instance, want to put the significance, the importance of your answer to your thesis statement, or why your research question is important after you've stated it. And lastly, check your assignment instructions. Your professor may instruct you to include your thesis or your research question first, although that is unusual. The final myth or misconception I'd like to clear up is that the middle of your essay should have 3 paragraphs, 1 point per paragraph. That means you would have 3 points in the middle of your paper and only 3 points with 1 paragraph per point. That also isn't true. This strategy may work for very short papers, like 2 to 3 pages, or sometimes it works well on exams. Keep in mind, though, that for papers longer than that, a main point can take more than 1 paragraph to explain. And secondly, it's only common sense that a longer paper, such as 4 to 6 pages or 10 pages or 15, needs more than 3 paragraphs in the middle. Imagine writing a 6-page paper that only has 3 paragraphs in the middle. They'd be over a page long each, and that's too long for a paragraph. That's really hard on your reader. So you can have 2 points or 3 points or 4 points or 5 points or more in the middle of your paper, depending on the length of your paper, and you will in all probability have more than 3 paragraphs. One of the major problems with essays and research papers is a lack of consistency between the beginning of the paper and the answer given at the end. That's usually because students don't reread their work to check for consistency, or they don't write a second draft. Always give yourself enough time to write that second draft. Always check the consistency of your answer. So, to do this, it's fairly simple. Highlight the thesis or your answer to the question, the one you put in the beginning of your paper, then go straight to the conclusions and highlight the conclusions. That is, the answer to your question that you found after doing all the analysis at the end of your paper. Put them side by side and ask yourself, do they match? That is, do you give the same answer in both places? If not, it's important to revise your introduction so that your thesis statement or your research question matches your closing conclusions. One of the best ways to check the flow of your paper and revise it is to do a reverse outline. Once you've checked to make sure that your thesis and your conclusions match, then take that revised thesis statement and put it at the top of a new notebook page or computer screen. Now, read each paragraph from the middle of your paper and describe the main content of each paragraph in 1 or 2 words. Do that for each paragraph and then make a list on that blank page or screen underneath your thesis in the same order as your paragraphs of those words or phrases. What you're doing is creating an outline of the paper as you've written it. First question, does your middle cover each of the concepts you included in your thesis statement or your research question? If not, then make a note to fill in that gap. Here's an example of how to create a reverse outline using student Jonathan Clodman's award-winning essay. I should point out that the initial reverse outline that's given in the next couple of slides, I made up myself. The final is taken from his actual essay. So the research question that Jonathan asked was, how did differences in news coverage between the 2015 CUPE strike and the 2015 public school teacher strike contribute to different public perspectives of the incidents themselves? A potential thesis statement he could create for the beginning of such a paper would answer this question. He might say, as I argue, textual and visual coverage of the CUPE strike included Kellaway et al.'s three elements of, quote, perceived injustice, identification, and perceived instrumentality, end quote, and thus led to favorable public opinion of this strike. In contrast, coverage of the ETFO strike lacked these elements and focused mostly on union demands and the impact of the strike on children and parents, so did not garner public sympathy. Keep this thesis in mind as we look at the reverse outline created. Here is a reverse outline from the middle of the essay. Each of these phrases captures the content of each paragraph included in the essay. As you read through this list, take a look at what's missing, what seems like a digression, and what seems to be out of order. And so as we go through this, the writer spent the first paragraph after the introduction outlining the methods of analysis and the news organization studied, then moved to labor issues, first paragraph about CUPE, next paragraph about ETFO, and the labor issues omitted, then moved to ETFO, what teachers would and would not do, had a paragraph about strategic benefits, followed by 4 paragraphs about ETFO, who gets to speak, children's images, bosses' images, teachers' images, followed by 2 paragraphs about CUPE, who gets to speak, and images of solidarity. That would be followed by the concluding paragraph. So take a look at it. What issues do you see with this order? Is there any repetition, anything that looks out of place in relation to the question, and anything that doesn't seem to fit with the rest? Jonathan is writing a comparison contrast paper. He's writing about 2 different strikes. And when you're doing a comparison contrast paper, the order is really important. If you begin your introduction by naming one author or one entity first, followed by a second, then you need to keep that order throughout your thesis and research question, right through all the parts of the middle of your paper to the conclusions. In the thesis, CUPE was named first and ETFO second, but notice that the middle of the paper doesn't always follow that order. So for instance, there's a long section about ETFO in the middle. The ETFO paragraph, moreover, about who gets to speak comes quite early, but the CUPE paragraph about the same thing comes very near the end. So that's out of order somehow. Also, the ETFO has 3 paragraphs about images, and the CUPE single paragraph is again out of order, and it's placed right at the end of the middle. There's a lone paragraph about strategic benefits that seems out of place, especially given the question in the thesis. So I would ask if this paragraph is relevant. It's also noticeable that Clodman et al. Is named in the thesis statement, but is never explained in the middle of the paper. And so a revised order for the middle of this particular paper might be to begin and keep the same paragraph about methods, the analysis methods and the news organizations covered, to include a paragraph about Kellerman et al., to explain and define the concepts and theories that are being used and applied in this paper, and then to reorder the rest of the middle so that it goes CUPE, ETFO, CUPE, ETFO, CUPE, ETFO. First two paragraphs of CUPE ETFO both speak of labor issues. The second two about who gets to speak. The third two about images included or omitted for each. That is followed by a paragraph about the strategic benefits of positive coverage, which seems to fit much better towards the end of the middle. And finally, a paragraph about the impact on the two unions of that positive coverage. The writer would follow this with concluding paragraphs. I think you can see for yourself, this order makes much more sense and shows the benefits of creating a reverse outline once you've finished your first draft. A reverse outline isn't the only strategy that you can use to look for structure. If you're a more visually minded person, then concept mapping might work better for you. This is essentially drawing your essay or report by putting your central idea or thesis in the middle and placing each new point in relation to that central idea and to the other points. You can do this through such things as post-it notes, electronic or physical, or simply by drawing circles with a phrase for each paragraph branching out from that center. Talk out loud protocols also work quite well. It means you need to pick up the phone or find a member of your household to explain your thesis or central idea to, and then to explain your points to them. Ask yourself and ask them if the order of your explanation makes sense. That is it difficult to explain in the order you've written it? If it is, then revise the structure accordingly. For longer papers, say 12 to 15 pages or longer, try sectioning. That means creating headings, whether you include them later or not, to cover your main points. Group your smaller points under the headings. See if everything fits under those main headings, if anything has been left out, and if the written order is working. And revise accordingly. Once again, you need to think about your reader when you're checking for structure and flow to make sure that each point flows logically out of the previous one. Once you have figured out the main structure of the middle of your paper and you check the introduction and conclusion for consistency, you can then move on to looking at individual paragraphs and sentences. It helps to think about paragraphs as storytelling. There is a unity to each paragraph because each paragraph expresses one idea. Generally speaking, there is a topic sentence in every sentence. In academic writing, you're expected to make the topic sentence the first sentence in a paragraph. Professional writers writing magazine articles can make it appear anywhere. The importance of writing the first sentence in a paragraph in an academic paper as the topic sentence is because it tells us what to expect in the paragraph. You don't leave us guessing. That first sentence tells us what this small story of the paragraph is about. The next sentences after the first one develop the story. The middle of the paragraph provides the evidence. The rest of the paragraph explains the meaning of that evidence in relation to the thesis or central idea. And the final sentence closes the story by telling us what we've just heard. I said earlier that different types of paragraphs have different purposes. So you can use paragraphs for different things, such as defining terms, to compare and contrast, to evaluate causes and reasons, to examine effects and their consequences, to analyze the topic, to describe the topic, or to offer a chronology of an event. But the classic analytic paragraph is the sandwich. That is the storytelling paragraph where in the first sentence you state the topic of your paragraph and what you're going to show us. In the next part, you show us the evidence or describe it. That is description. You follow that by explaining what the evidence means. That is your analysis. And you then tell us in the last sentence what you've shown us. For instance, here's an example from Jonathan Clodman's paper about the CUPE and ETFO strikes of 2015. The first sentence states a contrast in images and stories, while the second hones in on the point about to be made about the CUPE strike, that is, the faces of the picket line. The text in blue provides solid evidence that supports this statement by including several cited quotes and descriptions of evidence. Clodman then tells us what this evidence means, turning to analysis in the yellow highlighted text. And the green sentence at the end summarizes the impact on readers, which is directly related to his thesis statement. So you can see the sandwich analogy working here. Tell us what to expect in this paragraph. Tell us the topic of the paragraph. Show us the evidence, tell us what the evidence means, and then give a conclusion about that evidence, what we've just heard, and the argument that you provided. That means in typical evidence analysis paragraphs that every paragraph in the middle of your paper that makes a point about evidence you found should include an opening statement of the point about to be made, evidence that you cite to support that point, a shift to analysis to what that evidence means in relation to your thesis, and finally, a closing sentence that summarizes the point and its impact, again, in relation to your thesis. There is no one right length for a paragraph, and your paragraphs don't have to be identical in length. That's a myth. The reality is, of course, the paragraphs can vary in length, but you do need to watch for very short and very long ones. Paragraphs are visual markers on the page or screen that tell readers when you're changing to a new point or a new topic. That's their importance to lead the reader through your work. When you find very short paragraphs in the middle of an essay or research paper, that may indicate that you haven't developed a point enough. You may be missing evidence or missing analysis. Very long sentences, that is, ones that are more than 3/4 of a page long, may actually contain more than one topic and may need breaking up. I would add that this last point I am finding constantly these days, long blocks of text that need breaking up but that aren't. A quick and simple strategy for checking for balance in your paragraphs is to reduce the view of your pages so that you can see only the outlines of the paragraphs, as in the two examples on this page. And you will notice that in the example on the left, the paragraphs are longer than the separate example on the right. But the paragraphs are relatively balanced. They don't, as I said before, need to be exactly the same length, but you're looking for paragraphs of approximately the same length. Here's an example of unbalanced paragraphs. You can see in the example on the left that there's a very long paragraph at the top, followed by a very short paragraph. I'd be looking at that first paragraph to see if it needs breaking up, and at the second paragraph to see if it needs further development. Similarly, the example on the right has a short paragraph to start, a long one in the middle, and a one-sentence paragraph to end. I would be examining the short paragraph at the first, and I would especially be examining that one-sentence paragraph at the end. Does the sentence need to be joined to an earlier paragraph? Does it need to be taken out? Or does it need further development to create a full paragraph? To learn more about structuring your essay, about working on paragraphs, and so on, we welcome you to visit the Writing Center, where you can book a free 50-minute video chat with a writing specialist or a 15-minute drop-in appointment for quick questions that you have. We also run workshops every term, and you should look upon us as learning opportunities to work with knowledgeable writers. Writing is learning for life. Working on it now can stand you in good stead for the rest of your life. Come to our homepage or search for Writing Center on York's website. You click Enroll to register, and you can then book your own appointments. We welcome you to the Writing Center. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.